Since the time of Darwin, many determined individuals have searched for missing links between ape and man. Periodically, fragmentary skeletons have been found, and artists' reconstructions of their bones are presented to the public as undeniable evidence that man evolved from ape-like creatures. To scientists who study their bones, these alleged transitional forms are called hominins.
A family tree or bush is often used to represent how hominins are thought to be related. Most of the hominin species are understood by experts in the field to be evolutionary dead ends. Apes or variants of humans that went extinct, shown as broken side branches. Paleoanthropologists generally recognize only a few hominin species in the direct human lineage. Among them are some of the most well-known discoveries, such as the famous Lucy skeleton. If human evolution is a valid theory, the hominin fossil should fall along a traceable path, starting with an early ape-like species such as Lucy into some form of Homo habilis intermediate, then into the human-looking Homo erectus and Neanderthal type, and finally into modern Homo sapiens. What you may not realize is that there are leading experts in the field that contest the status of each of these alleged hominin ancestors. Let's take a look at what we know about these hominins. Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis. Lucy is the nickname given to a partial fossil skeleton discovered in 1974 in the Afar region of Ethiopia by paleoanthropologist Donald Johansen. The bones of Lucy are believed to represent a single individual skeleton. Johansen claimed that Lucy belonged to an extinct population of ape-like creatures that once roamed Africa between 3 to 4 million years ago. The species Lucy is said to represent was named by Johansen as Australopithecus afarensis, meaning southern ape from Afar. To date, over 400 specimens have been attributed to Lucy's kind, afarensis, but nearly all of those consist of isolated bones or bone fragments that were found eroding out of the hillsides, jumbled together with the fossils of all kinds of African species. With only 20% of Lucy's skeleton preserved, it remains one of the most complete afarensis skeletons discovered. However, the bones attributed to Lucy and her kind were found disconnected and broadly scattered across the Afar landscape.
Johansen claims that Lucy is 40% complete. Well, actually, if you count the missing bones of the hands and feet, it's actually only 20% complete, so much of it is missing. Moreover, they had to sift 20 tons of sediment, so they would screen them and get rid of all the loose sediment, and they would wash it by the river, and they would pick out the bones that Johansen said may belong to Lucy's skeleton, and there were hundreds of fragments. So they had to sift not only just 20 tons of sediment, but it was an area of about 50 square meters. So do all those bones belong to Lucy's skeleton? It's an open question. In 2015, an evolutionary scientific journal showed that actually one of the vertebrae bones belongs to baboon. But for 40 years it went unnoticed, and Lucy was reconstructed in museums with that bone as a part of the skeleton all around the world. So do we really know for sure if Lucy's skeleton and the broader kind belong to the same species? Well, I don't think we should trust that, because even today, numerous experts in the field have written extensively in the scientific literature that afarensis appears to be a commixture of ape bones and human bones. It's not a single species, it's not a valid taxon, according to these evolutionary paleoanthropologists.
It is widely acknowledged that the fossils attributed to afarensis display a substantial range of variation in both size and anatomy, leading many paleo experts to question whether all of the remains belong to the same species. In fact, Johansen originally reported in the journal Nature that at least 2 different species from separate genera were represented in his collection of bones. He described some of his fossils as looking virtually identical to modern humans, while other fossils he described as looking distinctly like apes. Later, Johansen decided to reclassify all of his fossils, including the human-looking bones, to a single new species which he named Australopithecus afarensis. The extensive range of variations seen in these fossils were now explained as physical differences between males and females of the same species, called sexual dimorphism. To make the story work, paleoanthropologists have claimed that the larger human-looking bones belonged to males that walked upright like modern humans, whereas the smaller ape-looking bones belonged to females that lived in the trees. However, experts in the field have taken issue with Johansson's sexual dimorphism hypothesis and have cited evidence that his original interpretation was more accurate, that afarensis is a jumble of ape and human bones.
There's two basic camps. There's the arborealists and the terrestrialists. The arborealists tend to emphasize the bones that have been called Lucy's kind that looked very apish. Now the terrestrialists, like Johansson, they'll emphasize the isolated bones that look more human. For example, they found a fourth metatarsal bone, and this was published in journals in 2011. And they say, see, this isolated foot bone looks human. Therefore, it proves our model, that Lucy's kind actually walked upright like modern humans, and therefore it supports the displays we see in museums and in textbooks around the world. To make sense of it, they say, well, maybe the larger bones that look more human-like belong to males. And the males walked habitually upright like modern humans, and the smaller ape-looking bones belonged to females. And so these females were more like apes and lived among the trees. We've never seen a sexual dimorphism where the males locomote fundamentally different than the females. So how do we make sense of this? Well, there's a third competing view that actually Lucy's kind is a mixture of ape bones and human bones. Therefore, it's not a valid taxon, it's not a real species. And this has actually been promoted by numerous experts in the field, including famous paleo expert Richard Leakey and his mother, Mary Leakey. In fact, even in the journal Human Evolution, Schmidt and Hausler, leading experts in the field, said just that. Afarensis, Lucy's kind, is a jumble of multiple species, not our ancestor.
In 1976, footprints fossilized in ash were found in Laetoli, Tanzania, by British paleoanthropologist Mary Leakey, and were dated to be 3.7 million years old. Researchers describe the Laetoli footprints as looking virtually identical to those made by humans. The fossilized footprints lack a fundamental characteristic of all living apes, a grasping big toe. In describing her own discovery, Mary Leakey acknowledged that they don't look any different from modern human footprints, an observation that is widely acknowledged by experts in the field. This, however, presents a fundamental challenge for evolutionary scientists, since modern humans are not supposed to have existed 3.7 million years ago. Such a finding would effectively falsify the ape-to-man theory. To resolve this conflict, Johansson and colleagues claimed that Lucy's kind formed the human-looking footprints in Laetoli, even though the footprints were found 1,000 miles away from where Lucy was discovered in Hadar and dated over 500,000 years older. The actual skeletal remains of Lucy could not substantiate their claim either, because the critical bones of the feet were missing. Soon after the discovery of Lucy, a large collection of fossils recovered at a separate site in Hadar cast more doubt on these claims. The sample included a number of hand and foot bones, including a partial foot skeleton that was assigned to Lucy's species Afarensis. In the American Journal of Physical Anthropology, evolutionary anatomists Jack Stern and Randall Sussman performed a comprehensive analysis of the hand and foot bones. It was clear to these researchers that the Hadar hands and feet were strikingly similar to living African apes. They concluded there is no evidence that any living primate has long curved, heavy-muscled hands and feet for any purpose other than to meet the demands of full or part-time tree-dwelling life. This has left evolutionists with a dilemma, which Scientific American has described as the world's oldest whodunit, an unsolved mystery.
If Lucy's kind cannot be credited with forming the human-looking Laetoli footprints, then who or what did? In an attempt to solve this mystery, former researcher of the Laetoli footprints, Russell Tuttle, suggests a far-fetched idea.
Tuttle writes in Natural History, "In any case, we should shelve the loose assumption that the Laetoli footprints were made by Lucy's kind Australopithecus afarensis. The Laetoli footprints hint that at least one other hominid roamed Africa at about the same time. Perhaps a better explanation for why the footprints look identical to humans is simply because they were formed by humans. Tuttle admits this would be the most reasonable interpretation, except for one problem. He believes the dating methods prove the ash layers were deposited long before the first humans evolved. But what if the dates obtained were wrong? As it turns out, the Laetoli footprints were dated using the potassium-argon method, a radioisotope dating method that has an embarrassing track record of yielding exaggerated ages, millions of years, when testing its accuracy on rocks of known age that formed recently.
The major problem with all the radioactive dating methods is the first assumption, which is the initial conditions. It is assumed that when a volcano erupts and the lava flows over the ground, that all the gases escape, and when the rock cools, you only have the parent potassium in the rock, no argon. But of course, we weren't there in the past to test that assumption. And that's why it's critical that we look at present-day volcanic eruptions. And one of the things that we've discovered is that the argon doesn't escape. A classic example is at Mount St Helens. It erupted in 1980, and scientists were able to watch the various lava flows building up the new dome. And a lava flow that we know erupted in 1986 was tested 10 years later in 1996, dated with potassium argon. What was discovered was that it gave an age of up to over 1 million years. Some of its minerals did. The whole rock gave an age of over 300,000 years for a rock that we observed form that was only 10 years old. And that's important because when it comes to the question of human evolution, we have to remember that the bones themselves were not dated with potassium argon. Often it wasn't the rock that they were buried in, because a lava flow would have melted and destroyed human bones. But we're looking at lava flows or volcanic ash deposits that are close to, in layers below or above where the human fossils are found. The ash that's spread out and deposited in the layer is of material that's already quickly congealed. And so that material is a prime candidate for quickly locking in the excess argon. And so the volcanic ash bed will invariably have problems when it's dated with potassium argon. And so if the potassium argon method can't be trusted on recent or ancient lava flows, then there's a real problem in establishing a true chronology for these supposed human ancestor fossils.
A more reasonable interpretation of the evidence is that the dating methods are unreliable and the Laetoli footprints look human because they were formed by humans. Handyman, Homo habilis. The next alleged hominin species on the path to modern humans has traditionally been Homo habilis. The discovery of Homo habilis was announced to the world in 1964. The bones were found at Olduvai Gorge, Tanzania, and consisted of 2 broken skull fragments, a deformed lower jawbone, a partial hand, and a tooth molar. Famous paleoanthropologists Lewis and Mary Leakey claimed the fossils belonged to the earliest toolmaker and was given the name Handyman. To this day, Homo habilis is presented in textbooks as an ape-like ancestor to man. Yet few people realize there is an ongoing debate among the paleoanthropology community regarding the status of Homo habilis. Most experts in the field now deny Homo habilis a position in the direct human lineage, and many others reject the validity of this species as a classification. Much of the controversy has to do with the extremely incomplete and fragmentary nature of the remains. None of the bones identified as Homo habilis were found physically connected to a more complete skeleton. The loose bones were scattered widely across the excavated area, jumbled together in a mixed bone bed containing many different species, including monkeys, extinct apes, and humans. Some of the bones are described as remarkably like those of modern humans, and others remarkably ape-like. Paleo experts have attempted to resolve these contradictory findings by reassigning the appropriate bones to the extinct ape genus Australopithecus. To a growing number of experts, the fossils of Homo habilis look too much like a tree-dwelling ape to be considered a human ancestor. Among them is Bernard Wood, world-renowned evolutionary paleoanthropologist and foremost authority on Homo habilis, who has extensively studied the fossil remains for the past 50 years since its discovery. In Nature, Wood makes the following assessment. Even with all the fossil evidence and analytical techniques from the past 50 years, a convincing hypothesis for the origin of Homo remains elusive. The species is too unlike Homo erectus to be its immediate ancestor. Wood has come to the firm conclusion that Homo habilis is not our ancestor. Homo erectus. In the late 19th century, Dutch anatomist Eugene Dubois set off to the Indonesian island of Java. Along the banks of the Solo River, he came upon a skull cap, a femur bone, and a tooth. The leg bone resembled a modern human's, but the skull cap displayed some unusual features. Dubois interpreted the skull cap as having ape-like qualities and assigned the fossils to a new species that he named Pithecanthropus erectus. The Greek name literally translates as upright ape-man, in accordance with Dubois' conviction that humans evolved from ape-like creatures. Since then, a number of specimens from Africa, Europe, and Asia have been found, and all have subsequently been renamed Homo erectus, reflecting its current status as the immediate ancestor to Homo sapiens, a claim that has not been substantiated by the fossil evidence. Most of the recovered bones are highly fragmentary, consisting of fragmented skulls, jaws, isolated teeth, and a single intact femur bone. Only one nearly complete Homo erectus skeleton has been found and nicknamed Turkana Boy, recovered in Kenya in 1984. For the first time, it provided paleoanthropologists with a clearer picture of what Homo erectus looked like. The anatomy of the skeleton and overall size of Turkana Boy is unquestionably human. Dental evidence and unfused growth plates indicated to anatomists that had he lived until adulthood, he would have grown to over 6 feet tall. Experts in the field now universally acknowledge that the overall anatomy of Homo erectus overlaps extensively with modern humans. In fact, a number of evolutionary paleo experts insist upon reclassifying them as Homo sapiens. In their view, the skeletal features fall within the range of human variation. In addition, archaeological evidence indicates Homo erectus was able to perform sophisticated tasks and complete extraordinary feats requiring modern human intelligence, including the ability to construct a seaworthy vessel and navigate significant stretches of open seas.
Paleoanthropologists have traditionally interpreted Neanderthals as a separate subhuman species. In popular movies, they're portrayed as half-stooped, brutish cavemen with low intelligence. Few people realize this mental image stems from an outdated evolutionary perception that Neanderthals are a missing link between ape and man.
Neanderthal man. In 1908, French anatomist Marcelin Boule fraudulently arranged the bones to appear ape-like with a grasping big toe and a bent-kneed, bent-hip posture. In his view, Neanderthals were a degenerate race, too primitive to be considered Homo sapiens. Boule's errors were eventually corrected. Now, with thousands of Neanderthal specimens and a complete skeleton assembled, it is clear to paleoanthropologists that Neanderthals were human in their anatomy, albeit more robustly built, but with few relatively minor differences. Experts on human evolution acknowledge that a Neanderthal in modern dress would go unnoticed on a New York City subway. Foremost authority on Neanderthals, Eric Trinkhaus, confirms detailed comparisons of Neanderthal skeletal remains with those of modern humans have shown that there is nothing in Neanderthal anatomy that conclusively indicates locomotor, manipulative, intellectual or linguistic abilities inferior to those of modern humans. Archaeology has further revealed an impressive cultural inventory, including fire, stone tools, tailored clothing, art, musical instruments, cosmetics, jewelry, and ceremonial burial of their loved ones, a defining aspect of what it means to be human. In 2010, Swedish geneticist Svante Pääbo and his international team of researchers sequenced the first ever nearly complete Neanderthal genome, confirming once and for all that they were fully human and members of our own species, Homo sapiens.
About 3% of my genome is Neanderthal. About 3% of your average Eurasian is Neanderthal. But if 60% of Neanderthal is amongst Eurasians, that means that we all have different pieces. When they discovered DNA in Neanderthal bones, that wasn't supposed to happen. The bones are too old. In the evolutionary model, 30,000 years ago, 50, 100,000 years ago, Neanderthal bones should have no DNA left in them. And yet they do. That was a big surprise. And when we look at the ancient DNA we can pull up and sequence DNA, it's clear multiple interbreedings happen between human, Homo sapiens, and human, Neanderthal. They're not supposed to be human. And yet, 3%. That means that for every 100 of my ancestors, 3 of them were a Neanderthal. That makes them people. Homo sapiens. Human beings. And so therefore should not surprise us about the fossil record. All these things we're learning about Neanderthals recently has completely changed the picture that we were given when we were younger, especially the picture they tried to give us in the 1800s.
The age-old evolutionary assumption that Neanderthals were a subhuman species has been disproven. Evolutionary paleoanthropologists traditionally expected the hominin fossil record to reveal a traceable linear progression where an ape-like Australopithecus species, such as Lucy, evolved into Homo habilis, which evolved into Homo erectus, which evolved into Homo sapiens. In recent decades, however, this view has been dramatically overturned. Instead of a simple human family tree with a few branches, the paleo community now describes the hominin fossil record as a messy bush, with many disconnected branches showing no clear evolutionary progression from ape to man. The pattern that is emerging in the hominin fossil record is surprisingly consistent with a biblical view of human origins recorded in Genesis, which teaches that humans and apes were created as independent forms of life. Indeed, there appears to be a clear separation between 2 distinct types in the fossil record, the human type, called Homo, and the extinct ape type, called Australopithecus. These 2 types are found together in rock strata of equivalent age, as far back as hominin fossils are found, just as the Laetoli footprints have confirmed. This shows that humans have always coexisted with a diversity of apes, rather than one evolving into the other.